What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we're going to look into a book from the early days of D&D 5th edition, the Dungeon Master's Guide. Yes, we are going back to one of the original 3 core rule books of the system, because there is a lot of stuff in this book that a lot of people don't talk about. And I'm specifically jumping to Chapter 9, the Dungeon Master's Workshop, because this chapter is full of variant rules, different ways that you can tweak the system to fit your game. And there are a lot of these that I had completely forgotten about since the last time I read through this book. And I'm so glad that I looked at them because there are some great ideas here. And I'm going to do a ranking of my thoughts on the different variant rules that are present in Chapter 9 of the DMG. I am being specific because things like feats, multi-classing, flanking, skills with different abilities, all that stuff is like Player's Handbook or different parts of this book. I'm specifically looking at the variant options in Chapter 9, which we're going to get into all of them, but I just want to lay that groundwork so that you're not waiting for me to bring up feats and like, hey, what happened? So I'm going to go through all the different variant rules and give my thoughts on them. Some of them are going to be briefer than others, like the ones that are kind of mid-tier. I'll just tell you what they do and be like, yeah, it's fine, because some of them are just, they're fine if you want to use them, but there's nothing remarkably good or bad about them. So because this video is already, there's over 20 of them in this chapter. So because this may go a little long anyway, let's get into it. So there are 2 different ways that I could do this. I could go through them in order as they are presented in the book and present them to you that way, and then give my ranking of like what tier they fall into at that point. Or I could go by tier and give you all the ones that are in each tier. I think I'm going to do it that way, just so I can kind of manage how I'm talking about each one. So I'm going to start off with the F tier, the dregs, the bottom of the barrel, the ones that I don't think that you should use in any game. Even if they fit well, I read them and was like, these don't seem great. Okay, fans of the channel will know that every time I do a like rules heavy, like steal rules from other systems video, initiative gets brought up all the time. And this chapter has 3 different variant versions of initiative, and I'm going to talk about one of them in the F tier. The speed factor initiative system seems like the clunkiest. So the idea being that the actions that you're going to be taking on your turn affect how quickly you can take your turn. Spells take a lot longer than stabbing with a dagger. And if you're a giant, you're going to swing slower than a fairy. That's the idea. And so you have all these different modifiers based on your size and what you plan on doing on your turn, which in theory sounds fine, but in actual execution, it sounds like it would slog down combat, because at the end of every round, every player, and as the DM, every NPC has to decide in that moment what they're going to be doing on their turn, and then adding and subtracting numbers based on those decisions. And you know that your players are going to strategize with each other and talk about, well, if you do this, then you're going to go before me, so maybe I should do this so I can still go before you. And then everybody rolls initiative to see what they get based on the modifiers on their rolls. And yeah, I think that it would make combat like 3 times as long. So I know that I have a lot of thoughts on initiative and how it to be fixed. Speed factor is not a way to fix it, but maybe you've used it and it hasn't gone that bad. I could see tables that use it consistently getting acclimated to it and, hitting a rhythm with it. But I certainly don't think that it's going to greatly enhance the combat experience, either by making it shorter or by making it more realistic. I don't really like it that much. Another thing that I really like from the Genesis/Star Wars role-playing game system that I think I've talked about on the channel before, if not, then that'll definitely be in the next steal these mechanics for your D&D game. I really like their critical injuries table. When you suffer a critical hit, they have where you roll a D100, and there's a bunch of different things that can happen, and there's mechanical stuff that goes along with it, and there's very clear rules for how to heal the injuries, and I like it a lot. Injuries in the DMG Chapter 9 are awful. I don't like them at all. I know that there are some other third-party books or DMG books out there that have done lingering injuries well. The DMG beefs it. And my issues with this system lie in one very simple reason. Their table where you roll for lingering injuries, it's a D20 roll and there's only 9 options, which means the likelihood of some of the really debilitating things on here are huge. And the frequency with which you do it, like it's if you suffer a critical hit, drop to 0 hit points, or fail a saving throw by 5 or more. If it were 15 or more, maybe I would go with you there. But 5 or more is that's going to lead to a lot of frequency. And number 1 on the table is lose an eye. Number 2 on the table, lose an arm or a hand. There you have a 5% chance of one of those things happening. Lose a foot or a leg where your speed is halved. And so you essentially have a 15% chance of something grossly debilitating that only the regenerate spell is what it lists can fix. And that's way too frequent for me. I don't like it being that frequent. The way the Genesis does it is a lot better because there are some super debilitating things, but they are very difficult to actually have happen. So I can get into that at a later time because, yeah, I don't think I've talked about it on the channel. So that's a good video idea. But lingering injuries as presented in the DMG, do not touch. And that's it for F tier. Next up is D tier. Another initiative variant showing up in D tier, passive initiative, where essentially instead of rolling initiative at the start of the combat, it's just 10 plus your dex modifier is your perpetual initiative score. The reason I put it in D tier, it could work if you really want to streamline every facet of combat that you can and you want to minimize the dice rolls, then sure. But rolling dice is kind of the fun part of the game for a lot of people. And so, yeah, you can do it. And there's nothing horribly offensive about it. I think it would lead to kind of boring combat that everybody is always going in the same order every single time. And there's no variance and there's no joy of like, oh, I finally beat the rogue. Like so many games when the paladin finally beats the rogue in initiative, it's like a celebration. And you're removing that moment because it's just a constant thing. And then the other thing in D tier, there's only one other. So they introduced plot points as a variant rule. And there's 3 different versions of plot points. And specifically number 3, which is the gods must be crazy, I'm putting in D tier because if your table needs it, fine. If it doesn't, then blah. So essentially, basically, you get when you spend a plot point, you become the DM. Like it's the idea is it's for tables who don't have a single person that wants to be the dungeon master. And so you can spend a plot point to take over the table and your character essentially becomes an NPC that's just tagging along. And there's one very specific instance in which I can see this working really well. And it's like a Battle of Helm's Deep moment where Gandalf returns with Éomer and the Rohirrim, and they charge in and save the day. And that's like if a combat is going really sideways and a party member goes down, like let's say that you have a fighter and a paladin, and the paladin is the DM right now, so their character isn't in the combat, they're off somewhere else, and the fighter goes down. The fighter player character spending a plot point to become the DM and usher in the return, like the paladin coming in to save the day. That could be a really cool moment, but I value storytelling and like a cohesive vision. And so co-DMing, fine, like that's great. But like the gods must be crazy system where it could be anybody and anybody can take over at any time. I know I'm a chaotic DM, that's my alignment, but this is too much chaos for even me. So that one's D tier. If you need to use it for your table, I think some tables can make it work, but just as a general rule of practice, I wouldn't touch it. Okay, C tier, I'm just going to kind of touch on what these rules are. As a general rule, I think if your campaign calls for them, they're fine. They're there to use, but there's nothing like super inspired about them that I'm like, oh yes, like these are super cool, you should use them, or so broken them like, ugh, don't touch. So first off is firearms / explosives. They have a whole bunch of different firearms and explosive types and things like that with damage and all that kind of stuff that you can drop into your game. I've spoken on like I know some of my podcasts and on this channel before I think about my dislike of firearms in D&D. A lot of that comes from the firearm rules from Pathfinder First Edition when I was DMing that and not really caring for how firearms were handled there. Here, they're just a different weapon type. So if you want to have firearms in your game, they're there. If not, leave them alone. Healer's Kit Dependency. I think this is how Healer's Kit and like short rests worked in the beta of D&D back when it was D&D Next, that in order to spend hit dice on a short rest, you had to expend a use of a Healer's Kit. If you want to stack a resource on top of short rest healing, because I know that some tables, like some DMs, want to make that cost something and not just be an easy like, yep, I'll roll dice. So that's fine if you want to. I probably never would, but it's there. And lastly is the honor/sanity abilities. These are an additional ability score that you can add into the game. That, if you have a campaign that's honor is a big deal or sanity is a big deal, you can add it in there, have it be an additional thing that you can make checks off of. It's fine. I think that you could get away with just, role playing that stuff and using the existing abilities. But if you want to use them, go for it. But before we continue, if you want to talk about this video or the other videos, or just talk about tabletop gaming in general, link to the Discord down below. Go check it out. Click on the link. Join us over there. We have a looking for group channel if you're looking for people to play with or run games for. We have, just general just for fun, like talking about books and movies and all kinds of stuff. So come hang out with us. Also, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/thegeekpantheon. If you want to support the channel and what I'm doing here, then you can do so over there, and it would be greatly appreciated. B tier, once again, I think these are a little bit better. I think there's some cool things that a lot of tables can do, especially if you want to change up the flavor of your campaign a little bit with a lot of these. I think that they're good. They're not just kind of neutral like C tier was. The first one is ability checks by class. And so the idea with this is when you're creating your character, anything that gives you skill proficiencies, you just don't pay attention to it. Just throw it all out. And when you pick your class, there's a table with different ability scores. So dexterity, wisdom, charisma, what have you. For each class has different options. And you pick one, and every skill that uses that ability, you have proficiency in. Basically, any roll that you make with that ability, you have proficiency. And then when you pick your background, it's the same thing. You pick another one based on your background. So you have 2 ability scores that you have proficiency in everything. I know that this can possibly be a little cheesy because there are some skills that use more abilities than others. Like if you pick strength, you're not getting a whole lot of bang for your buck in the ability department. But yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to make it a bit more cohesive, I could see people doing that. I probably never would, because it takes away a little bit of the nuance of the different classes, but it could be interesting to see how it works on a table. The rest variants, I think these are both really fun to make campaigns feel different. I don't think it breaks the game in a huge way. I just think that it can dial the knob between grim, dark, gritty realism and super epic heroes. And so the first one is epic heroism, where a short rest is only 5 minutes, a long rest is 1 hour. And besides that, all the rules are the same. And so the idea being that, you regain all of your hit points and all your spell slots just after an hour of resting. And so you can get a lot more packed into a day. So you really have that sense of going from fight to fight and constantly being able to fling around all your big spells. And the short rest is just that the action movie moment of the hero behind cover for a minute and just taking a few deep breaths and then stealing themselves and running back out there. That's kind of what evokes in my mind's eye of a short rest in the epic heroism rest variant. And then on the opposite side, the gritty realism, a short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is 7 days. And so if you want a very slow campaign in terms of the narrative time that is going by, then this is a great thing to switch up in your game, is just how long narratively a rest is. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of the actual gameplay, because you're still building your encounters and structuring them around how many short rests the party is going to have and how long until they're going to need a long rest and things like that. It's just within the confines of the narrative, how much time is passing. So I don't think these rules are as wild and crazy as they may initially seem when you read them. And the last variant initiative rule, side initiative. So this is where, the PCs roll initiative, the NPCs roll initiative, and you just go PC, NPC, PC, NPC. Or if the NPCs roll higher, NPC, PC. You get it. Each side of the encounter has an initiative count. This one is the best of the initiative variants presented in this book. I still don't, I would never use this, but I think it's fine if you want to streamline combat. If your goal with tweaking with the initiative is streamline combat, I think this is the best option that is presented, because you're still getting to roll. There's still some, variance on when the PCs get to go. And, there can be some strategy in that the party is deciding when each person goes. So if you really want the normally very slow paladin to go first. You can just decide that, and you don't have to leave it up to a roll. So yeah, I think that this one is the best. Like I said, I still wouldn't use this one just because it is too static, much like the passive initiative. But if you have a really strategic party that likes to be able to plan out their rounds and do cool things in combination with one another, then this can be a cool one to try out. Massive damage. So this one is if a player character takes damage greater than half of their maximum hit points, they make a DC 15 con saving throw, and if they fail, they have to roll on the system shock table. And there are a handful of things that can happen. I mean, they can drop to 0 hit points, or they can just lose their reaction for a round. And then those are the two ends of the spectrum, and then, you know, whatever's in between. But I like this one better than the lingering injuries because A, it is something that doesn't necessarily take somebody out of the combat. It can be an avoided thing, and I don't know. It just it narratively fits. Like, you know, the idea that you get hit so hard that you can't take a reaction. That makes sense. Like, you're just kind of dazed for a second. So yeah, I like this one. Once again, I'm not sure in the B tier. I'm not sure if these are ones that I would use in my game, but I could see them fitting well with certain games and certain dungeon masters and certain player types. So yeah, I think it's fine. I'm not going to be using it anytime soon, though. And lastly, on the B tier is the fear/horror rules, where basically if you see something that you have no hope of overcoming, you make a fear check, a wisdom saving throw, and if you fail, you're frightened of the thing that caused you to need to take that check for 1 minute. And then the horror one is the same thing, but it's a charisma saving throw where you see something that's just incomprehensible and terrifying. And if you fail, you get a short-term or long-term madness from the madness tables in the DMG. This one falls to B tier primarily because I'm not a huge fan of the frightened condition in D&D 5th edition, nor am I a huge fan of the long-term and short-term madness options presented in the DMG. I don't have a problem with these systems, and I think that they can work really well. I just wish that the results of the checks were better. And if I liked the frighten rules, I would like the fear system a lot more. And same thing with the madness rules. If I liked all of the madness options, then I would, you know, like the horror a lot better. If it thematically fits for your game, go for it, use it. And if you don't have a problem with the frightened or the madness rules, then more's the better. So narratively, if it fits, absolutely use this stuff. It can really like get player and character buy-in into your setting and what you're trying to do. But at the same time, I personally don't care for them. Okay, A tier. Now we're getting to the stuff that I would use at my table. Not at every table possibly, but these are things that I could definitely be convinced to incorporate into one of my games by a player, or that I might bring to a session 0 and petition my players like, hey, I think this is really cool. What do you all think? The first one is background/personality trait proficiency. And so this one is where, once again, anything that gives you skill proficiencies, you just ignore it. Throw it out the window. And if you're doing the background proficiencies, basically whatever you pick for your background, that is what gives you your proficiencies. Not what's listed as a skill proficiency, but you petition as a player. Like if you have the entertainer background and you're needing to roll deception to impersonate another person, I as a player could be like, now I have the actor background, so I really think like I would have proficiency, and I think it makes sense that I would be able to be adept at this role. And the same thing with personality trait, where instead of looking at your background, you look at like the personality traits that you come up with for your character, or roll for randomly if you're a chaotic person, on the background section of the player's handbook, and you use those to inform your proficiencies of, because I can never run from a fight, like if that's the personality trait, then, you know, intimidation in the middle of a combat to like get somebody to stand down because you are so resolute and you know that you would never run away from a fight. Get proficiency in that. And the idea being that if you get a class feature that grants you expertise, then at that point you pick an aspect of your background or your personality that you have expertise in. So if you have the entertainer background, maybe, you know, you were an actor for the Royal Theatre Company. And so anything that relates to that, you get expertise in. So deception to impersonate another person, disguise kit, stuff like that. It could be things that you could justify, like I was an actor to the Queen. I surely get a +6 to this role. And so I like this because it offers a good amount of flexibility, and it really gets people to think about their characters in terms of how they exist in the world, as opposed to looking at numbers on a sheet. Now, I understand for a lot of people, they would rather do the inverse and look at the numbers on the sheet and allow that to inform how they role play their character, which is totally valid. That's why this isn't S tier. It's not a like, use it, it's really cool thing. And just to be clear, even this, well, I'll get into S tier here in a second. Now, I know there are other systems that do this kind of thing, like Fate is really big on like aspects of your character and that informing getting booster roll, and Genesis is a very similar system in that regard. So maybe this doesn't fit well in D&D, but I think the way it's explained in the DMG, I think it could play really well at the right table. People that are really focused on role play and narrative and characters, I think it could work really well. Okay, the next one is Cleaving through creatures. So this is if you target an undamaged creature and your attack reduces it to 0 hit points, and then there's another creature within range that is undamaged, you can basically carry over the damage, and your attack would have hit them. Your damage can carry over. And I like this one. I think this is a fun rule. This one almost went to S tier for me because it is just so fun, and leftover damage just goes to waste, and there are so many conditions to it. If it has to be an undamaged creature that is it can't be that like the creature is battered down to 1 hit point. Like, it has to be undamaged and you just wipe it out with a single hit. And I think that this is fun, especially for fighters, especially for martial characters, using like a great weapon and just going up and swinging a wide arc and taking out like 3 kobolds in one swipe. That'd be a really cool moment. And I don't think that this is going to come up a whole heck of a lot to where it's going to break your encounters. And as a dungeon master, you can kind of account for this. If you're throwing a bunch of kobolds at the party and they have like a barbarian and a fighter that both use great weapons and are swinging crazy, then you could anticipate this happening with a couple of your kobolds. So I think that this one is really fun. It probably should have been an S tier. Now that I'm talking about it, it's an A tier, but this is one that I would definitely throw down on the table. Hero points. You basically get 5 hero points at first level, and then every time you gain a level, you lose all of your remaining hero points, and then you gain 5 plus half your character's level. And the idea being that you can spend a hero point when you make an ability roll, an attack roll, or a saving throw. And you can make it after the roll is made, but before you know the results. And when you spend it, you get to roll a d6 and add that to your roll. And then additionally, you get to, if you're making a death saving throw and you fail it, you can spend a hero point to just turn that failure into a success. And this one is fine. I think that, there are some abilities within the game like Bardic Inspiration that this might bump up against and maybe make a little redundant. But overall, I don't think it's that terrible, especially since it is a limited resource. And this absolutely depends on how frequently your players are leveling. Because if they are leveling, if they're consistently leveling before they have had a chance to spend all their hero points, then yeah, you're really undercutting some other stuff in the game. But if your leveling takes a little bit longer, especially once you get into those mid-tier levels of the game, then it might be less of an issue because your party will be running out of those hero points and really waiting for the level up. But I think it's fun. I think it elevates the abilities of the player characters, makes them more heroic, more epic, that kind of thing, in combat and stuff like that. So, it's fun. I enjoy it. And I think it's inoffensive. I can understand why some people wouldn't want to put it on their table, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to break anybody's game. Next up is Healing Surges. So this one, basically as an action, you get to spend hit dice and add your Constitution modifier for each hit dice spent to heal in combat. And then when you take a short rest, you regain a number of hit dice equal to your level divided by 4. And at a long rest, you regain all of your hit dice. And so once again, the idea being that, everybody has a means of healing in the moment in combat and can really keep going in the fight. This is great for parties that don't have a dedicated healer or a healer at all. If you have a table that like everybody wants to be like fighter, rogue, wizard, like classes that like iconically don't have healing, then this is a great alternative to trying to just load them full of potions. If you as a dungeon master don't want to have to keep track of how many potions you're giving the players and you just want them to have the ability to heal when they need to, Healing Surges is a great way to do that. It costs an action. So you are giving up essentially a round of your ability to do anything to heal. So it's carries a cost, but you are getting to stay in the fight, getting to continue fighting. and you regain your hit dice a lot quicker that way as well. And the last one in A tier, slow natural healing. So this is kind of the inverse. If you want healing to be more difficult, then when characters take a long rest, they don't regain all their hit points. They just can spend hit dice like a short rest, and then they regain half of their hit dice at the end of the long rest. So, yeah, this definitely slows down healing by a lot, which, if you're running that type of game, this is a pretty cool ability. And I think paired with like the gritty realism rest variant, you can get a really kind of realistic, grounded style of game where, a short rest is 8 hours and you can spend hit dice, and then a long rest is a week and you can spend hit dice, and that's the only way that you can regain your resource for healing. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's fine. I don't run this type of game, so I would never use the slow natural healing variant, but I could see it working well in other people's games. S tier time, top of the crop, rise to the top. So these are the ones that I think either should be used in every game or could be used in any game. Not saying that you have to, because these are obviously all variant rules. If you want to play with the vanilla rules across the board, you do you. But I think that all of these, most games could benefit from using in some capacity. So first off are plot points variants 1 and 2. So option 1 is What a Twist, where when a player spends a plot point, which everybody gets 1 plot point per session is the idea. When a player spends a plot point, they get to declare something as true. Just, they found a secret door. An NPC comes onto the scene. They have a piece of equipment that they would need in that exact moment. Obviously, nothing like, I have a flame tongue sword. No, but I have a rope. Isn't that helpful? And so, yeah, this idea being that, the players can have a lot of agency and introduce narrative things into a scene. I know some Dungeon Masters won't like this, but I already play in the Genesis setting where this is like a codified part of the rules. So this, I think, is just, it's fun, and it can really keep the players engaged all the time because they'll be looking for a moment where they can spend their plot point. And then plot point number 2 is the plot thickens, which is a variant off of plot point 1. So when somebody spends a plot point to declare something is true in the narrative, the player to their right then adds a negative aspect to whatever they introduce. So, an NPC comes running into the room at the exact right moment, but they're chased by a band of kobolds. I don't know why I'm bringing up kobolds so much this video. I've been watching a lot of Pack Tactics lately, and so maybe that's why, because Kobold is the host of that show. Yeah. A band of kobolds is chasing them in, and so now the party has to deal with that. Or there's a secret door, but it's trapped. And so I like this because it's another player doing it. It's not the DM. This could create a really adversarial nature if it was the DM adding the complication onto the player's plot point, but by keeping the impetus on the players to be the architects of their own complications, I think makes it a lot more fun of an environment and a lot more of like a crazy improv session as opposed to a battle back and forth. So I think that both of these are great. I think they would add a lot of fun wackiness to a table, and you should give it a shot. The next one is action options that are included. They have like a handful of additional actions that you can take in your turn. Half of them I thought were in the game anyway, like disarm or tumble. I just, I thought those are things you could just do, like make an acrobatics check to tumble through a hostile creature's space. But nope, that's a variant rule. The craziest one that was like a true variant on the system is the mark action, where when you make a melee attack, you can mark a creature, and while a creature is marked, your opportunity attacks against it have advantage, and additionally, your opportunity attacks against it don't cost you a reaction. You can still only take one opportunity attack, but you still have your reaction to use for other things. And I really like all of these. Like I said, I thought most of them were just the vanilla rules to begin with, because they add additional actions that you can take in combat. And for something like the mark action, I mean, D&D has always had a tank problem where, compelling things to attack the tank of the party, or just trying to allow the tank to control the battlefield is something that's inherently difficult with this system unless you have the DM bought in. Like, mechanically, it's a difficult thing to just do with the system. And marking does that to a certain extent, because it basically says, like, you're mine, and if you try to run away, I get to attack you, and I have a greater chance of landing that attack. Marking, like combined with the sentinel feat, would be very powerful because you have advantage and you can stop their movement if they're trying to move away from you. So that's like kind of an ultimate tank build. So I like the action options, and I think they should be included. The mark one is the most controversial one. That's the one that you might not want to include, but the rest of them, you just let your players shove. When they take the shove action, let them do it horizontally as well instead of just away from them. That's a variant rule. If vanilla is shoving is one direction, and that's silly to me. That's very silly. Morale for NPCs. Once again, this should just be part of your mindset as a dungeon master. There are certain circumstances where NPCs would run away. Like the kobolds see their leader get decapitated, they're going to take off running. And there's a bunch of different conditions presented in the DMG for like when characters might flee, but just in general, just keep that in the back of your mind that like they have morale. Not every monster fights to the death. So yeah, just do it. Like it's S tier. It makes sense to include in the game. Hitting cover is a really fun rule that I want to implement at my table. I'm just declaring that now. Basically, if a character is benefiting from cover of some kind, if they have cover, they get a +2. If they have 3/4 cover, they get a +5. And the idea being that if the roll against the character would have hit them if they didn't have cover, then the roll hits whatever is providing them cover. So they're hitting the table and the arrow sticks into it. And then you could add like a hit point amount to the object and eventually like break the cover, which would be an interesting thing. The funner option is if another character is providing cover for a monster. So let's say that, the fighter runs up to the front line and is attacking the kobold chieftain. Let's just stick with the theme. And the ranger behind them shoots an arrow, but the fighter is providing cover for the kobold chief. So the kobold chief gets a +2 to their AC. So let's say their AC is normally 14, but because of the +2, it's a 16. So if they roll a 15, then it misses them. But because it would have hit them with the cover, it hits the fighter. And then you check the fighter's AC. If their AC is higher, like it's an 18, then it just, it hits their armor and pings off, and the fighter can like look over their shoulder and be like, what the heck? Or if it's like a barbarian with a lower AC, then it hits them. Like if it would have hit the initial target's AC, but it didn't because of the cover, but it still hits the person providing cover, then you hit them. I think that's interesting. I think that's funny. And, this can kind of mess up your action economy and your damage and all that kind of stuff. So that aspect of it, talk to your players about, make sure that they're bought into that. But the hitting like inanimate cover, I love that. I also love the hitting like other combatants on the field. But I could see some players balking at it. So check with your table, but I think it's a lot of fun. And lastly, S tier. Last one I'm talking about. Those of you that are familiar with this chapter know what's coming. Proficiency Dice. So obviously, rules as written, you have a proficiency bonus +2, +3, +4, +5, +6 from levels 1 through 20. And, it's a static bonus that you get on your rolls. Proficiency Dice replace that with a die. So when you would have proficiency 2, you have a D4. When you have proficiency 3, a D6, so on and so forth until a D12. And so you roll that die alongside any roll that you would normally have just your proficiency bonus tacked onto. And then if you have expertise, you roll 2 of those dice instead of just 1. And, it's rolling more dice. It adds variety to the game. The averages still come out like the proficiency bonus normally would be, give or take a few decimals. But at the same time, like it just adds more pendulum swings to the game where, you're rolling a D8 with your attack rolls anytime you have proficiency. And so you might get a huge upswing of your attack capability. When you normally would just have a +4, you could get a +8 to your attack roll and really overcome some tougher monsters. Or at the same time, you might roll a 1 and what you thought was going to be a gimme attack ends up falling short. And so I think that this could be a fun, it's not for every table. Like I said, this throws like a lot of optimization of the game out the window because you can't rely on your proficiency bonus any longer. So take that for what you will. But I like rolling dice. I like the broad swings of the game of D&D. I like the triumphant, like, holy crap, we actually did it moments. And I also like the, oh no, what are we going to do moments as well. And Proficiency Dice just play into that. So I think give them a shot. They might not work for your table. I think that they would work for a lot more tables than probably you all are giving yourselves credit for. I think they would be a lot of fun and really engaging to play with because of the broad swings. And like the first time that you roll max on your proficiency die is going to be such a satisfying moment. Like the ability to get a +4 proficiency bonus at level 1 is great. And you know, if you get only a 1, you've only lost what you would like 1 from what you would normally have on that roll. And as you get higher and higher level, the swings become that much more dramatic. And so, yeah, give it a shot. Let me know what you thought down below. This might be a bit of a longer video, but I was torn between doing like a top 10 or touching on all of them. I wanted to touch on all of them. So let me know down below, what are your favorite variant rules? Did you like this? Would you like me to look at like the variant rules in the player's handbook or in some of the other source books that that Wizards has made? Let me know down below. And let me know what you thought about my rankings. Did I get some horribly wrong? Have you used some of the ones that I put in F and D tier and they worked great? Have you used some of the ones that I put in S tier and they bombed? Let me know. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.